Hi, this is Terry Bach, and I'm your host for the Rewrite Your Money Story series. I've noticed in talking with people about money that what frequently comes up is how often couples fight about it. Couples often have different money styles, and it's sometimes difficult to see the other person's point of view. And so it's really hard to compromise on it. And sometimes, though the arguing really seems like it's a money issue, it often isn't about money at all. So I have brought together some extraordinary experts to give us their perspective on the topic of couples fighting about money and how to help them. Today we're talking with Sue Thompson, who is known as America's financial management expert. Sue has over 30 years of experience and having founded several businesses, including Abundance Accounting, the Mastery of Money, and her current business, the CFO Agency. She has taught many entrepreneurs and individuals financial management for future wealth. Her on-point tips can take the scary idea of finance and turn it into an exciting plan for your future. So welcome, Sue. Thanks for being here.
Hi, Terry. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're very welcome. So I know that money issues are really one of the biggest challenges in a relationship. I think I read it. It's like the number one stressor in relationships. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us why from your point of view?
Sure. So money is a really emotional topic, has been for a really long time, especially in this country. It's also one of the least taught subjects. So we don't have a lot of resources to go to find answers on how to be in a healthy relationship with money. So we each have that going on individually, and then you bring two people together with all that stuff going on, and it can get challenging. So what I like to help my clients understand is that there's two sides to it. There's the nature side of it and the nurture side of it. Mm-hmm. And the nature side is kind of who you are, how you come at the world, what your filters are, the things that are unique to you. And I call those gifts to you. But for some, when there's too much of a good thing, it's not a good thing anymore, right?
Right.
And we'll unpack that a little bit today. And then there's the nurture side of it. So this is the side where we all grew up in households with two parents who also didn't have a lot of training around money unless we were lucky enough to be in a family that had that, or and also had their own nurture stuff or nature stuff going on. Mm-hmm. So we grow up with a lot of messages, either from our family or from the influential people in our lives. And oftentimes we'll internalize those. So for example, for me, my household was money doesn't grow on trees.
Right.
For me meant there's not enough of it. You got to work really hard if you want it, which I did for many, many years. But once we're able to learn another filter or be able to reframe those nurture stories in our life, then we're kind of empowered to be able to take on this thing called money in a new way. Right. But it does take some education to get there.
It really does, and money isn't something we talk about much.
No, we'll tell each other our sex lives before we'll talk about it.
Exactly. Yeah, I know. As a former therapist, we often did talk about their sex lives, but money was so uncomfortable to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the emotional side of actually giving money more power than it was ever intended to have. Right. It's supposed to be a tool that kind of supports us in creating the life that we want today. If we're in business, money is the language of business. It's kind of how we figure out how things are working. And so it's really important to reframe that relationship so it truly becomes a tool to achieving the goals and the dreams that we have.
Right. Yeah. And not give it so much power.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Exactly. So how do you see money challenges playing out in relationships?
That happens many ways. So let's kind of walk through a scenario because I find this it's kind of easier to see it in play. So if I were to ask the question, hey, are we going to go out to dinner tonight?
Right.
Just kind of let that settle in to all of our listeners, and I can guarantee you there's a whole multitude of different answers to that question coming up.
Exactly.
So for some people, it might be, well, maybe. But if we didn't go out, we could keep that money in the bank account, and then we'd have more for later in case something happens. On the other foot, which could be a spouse, a partner, a child, you could get, yeah, let's go out. There's a brand new restaurant down the street. We could invite the neighbors. We haven't seen them for a while, and we'll have a great time with everybody. And then there might be another person who says, yes, let's go out. There's a great restaurant that we haven't been to in a long time. We could celebrate life today, get the finest thing on the menu, try a great bottle of wine, and we'll just have a really romantic evening. It'll be the best of everything for us.
Sure.
So you can imagine the person who came up with well, what if we leave the money in the bank? And the person who says, let's get the greatest bottle of wine on the menu, going, what are we going to do? So what's our choice? Are we going to go out or aren't we? And if we do go out, are we going to McDonald's or are we going to the best restaurant in town? And and there's the trick is there's no right or wrong answer.
Exactly.
It's the right answer for the individual, and then it's a matter of trying to figure out what's best for the relationship in the moment.
Right.
We need to honor both. We need to have the nights where we go to McDonald's, and we need to have the nights where we get the fancy restaurant, or the night where we bring all our friends and family for that connection. We need to honor all of those. Those are the nature sides of us, and every one of us comes at things a little bit differently. So we want to first acknowledge those differences, and then be willing to be in conversation and negotiation to figure out what's the best thing for us to do right now, and making sure that over time everybody's wishes and needs and desires are honored.
And I think that's the toughest piece of it, of course, is that compromise when couples often can't see that other perspective, because they've each come from different backgrounds around money. And so it's hard to see that other.
And what's typically blocking the not able to see is one of two things. There's either a lot of fear around it, and scarcity around money is a real issue.
It is.
On one hand, and then on the other hand of, it'll all work out. Let's not worry about it, right? So those are two very real places to come from.
Exactly.
And so it's what I find is, in order to get past where we are today and maybe putting our feet in on both sides of the fence, is first knowing what's our come from, what's the too much. So if we go to the finest restaurant in town every night, eventually the credit card's going to get run up or the bank account's going to run out. But if we never go out to dinner, we've got a person over here who feels like they don't have the fullness of life that they desire to have. Well, the bank account grows, but we have no life experiences. And so to find that middle ground is the challenge and the goal.
It is. It is. Yeah. So can you share some thoughts or some ways that you help couples deal with this in relationships?
Yes. And the place to start is actually in the goals and the dreams. I know when I first got married, the pastor said, so there's you, there's your spouse, and then there's this thing called your marriage.
Right. Yeah.
And so each of us have our own goals and desires individually, and I think those are gifts to each of us because they're unique to us. And we should never think that, just because I think that, it's not a good and right goal to have. It's perfect for you. The challenge then in life is to figure out how to live it, right?
Exactly, yes.
And then there's goals of the marriage. What do we want to achieve in our marriage together? How do we want life to look as a couple? So I usually take, and so we can do this in couples, we can do this in businesses, we can do this with our children. We can go back to what's the long-term outcome that we're striving for? And what are the important things along the way? So for one, the important thing along the way is to have a bank account where there's a sense of security and a sense of
Mm-hmm.
safety. And for
Right.
the other, it might be to have enough life experiences that life is good and abundant and feels delightful. And we want to say, okay, so in our marriage, how do we bring those two things into the conversation? And we can do a big brain dump in the beginning, put it
Okay.
all on the table, right? There's no
Right.
right or wrong answer.
Exactly.
Put it
Yeah.
all out there, and then begin to go back through and prioritize it. What's first, second, and third? What's for today and what's for tomorrow? And then the big part is put some numbers to it.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, if I want to have a dining out budget, is my dining out budget $100 a month or is it $500 a month? And
Mm-hmm.
if I choose the $500 a month, what does that do to my bank account? Because there's some reality to that today, right? How much is
Exactly.
going
Yeah.
in and how much is coming out?
Mm-hmm.
And is it okay for me to have my budget so high that now I've got debt for it or not? It's a choice. And
Exactly.
so what we want to know is, based on our bigger goals and our longer term goals, does that choice really support you in achieving those goals? And so cash flow management, financial management is a process of
Mm-hmm.
tracking and paying attention. But the only reason we do that is to achieve the goals that we have. And I find oftentimes we do this as a couple, we do this in business, we do this in our
Mm-hmm.
own financial lives. We don't step apart long enough or often enough to say, what is my goal? And what does it really look like to get there? Yeah.
And I think a lot of people see budgeting like dieting. It's not something you want to do because it feels punitive. But if they
Mm-hmm.
as a tool to help them get to their goals and dreams, that's a very different story.
Mm-hmm. So
Yeah.
we've taken the dieting into lifestyle choices. I've
Right.
taken the budgeting into financial forecasting. Like
Yeah.
what is the legacy that we want to leave? Because we're going
Sure.
to leave one. Let's leave it
Right.
consciously.
Yes.
And then how do we want to live along the way and make sure that we stay on track to leave that legacy? Oftentimes I find it comes back to some compromises. But the other thing I find is when we get really clear on the goal of what it is we want, we've got some numbers to it so that it's not one of these someday things or one of these pie in the sky things.
Yeah.
We actually can make it happen because it became a little clearer. And we can do it by coming together and using the strengths of one another, the strengths of the being able to save money and the strength of living life to its fullest potential, and bring those two things together instead of going to the dark side of, well, we're going to have a lot of money and no life, or we're going to have a lot of life and no money.
Right. Right. So we'll be stressed out. Yeah. And I forgot what I was going to say there. What do you find is the biggest challenge that people have with putting all this together? Like, where do they seem to get stuck?
So I find often when you're not used to working with numbers, they become kind of frightening. They become, it's hard to learn how to apply them to a situation.
Sure.
So, for example, we talked about going out to dinner. Let's take that to the kind of home we want to live in, or the kind of car that we want to drive, or the kind of school we want to send our kids to.
Mm-hmm.
Every one of those has a price tag. And oftentimes, if we don't find the price tag first, if we're not clear on what's happening with it, it either seems way too far out of reach, so we just don't even go there, or it seems, or we just the money just keeps flowing. In other words, it just, every penny all of us has a job, whether we're consciously giving it to it or not, whether we're going to spend it today or whether we're going to put it in the bank today. That's the job of that penny. And if we're not conscious about it, the penny will go somewhere and we won't even have known where it went. So not to be afraid of the numbers. That's the thing, is just to start playing with them. It's like a muscle. It's a skill set, which means it can be learned.
Yes.
And you can build that by just take one step. Like, don't try and eat the whole elephant at once, but
Mm-hmm.
take one thing like going out to dinner, or take one thing like we want a different car, or take one thing like the kids' education, and see if you can come up with a plan for it, and then go back and do it again for another one.
And I think that fear is the thing that stops people. We get afraid, so we avoid, and we don't
Yes.
get the numbers, and we don't have these plans or these dreams and goals. We just kind of go along as if and don't have a plan. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I like that you're helping people take the fear out of money and making maybe even having some fun with it.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
It's so much
Yeah. When
easier
you
to deal with.
tie it to a vacation or tie it to a car, like, I mean, that's fun
Exactly.
to create a plan for, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. So, Sue, I know you have a gift for our audience. Would you describe that? But before you do, listeners, if you just click on the button right below the video, it'll take you right to Sue's gift.
All right. So the gift that is out there is called The Entrepreneur's Guide to Financial Ease. But the truth is, all of the steps that are out there, the tips and the tricks that are out there, are applicable to anyone. And that's another thing, if you think about your family budget, if you will, or your family finances as a business,
Yes.
as it is, all of these things, all of these steps and financial management tools are applicable to your personal picture. So
Exactly.
everything that's out there, I think there's 15 steps that can help you get
Okay.
into a flow of ease with financial management, and just start with one at a time,
Okay.
and see where it takes you, and then take the next step and take it on. And if you have questions, let us know. We're here to help with that process. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, Sue. I really enjoyed learning more about what you're doing with people too, and get your time. And for the listeners, thank you for once again being on the Rewrite Your Money Story series. Tune in tomorrow for our next expert, who will be sharing her expertise on couples fighting about money issues and how to help them.
Thank you, Terry.
Thank you.